conquer and we're going to take some. Is that understood? Yes, sir. That's what we're going to do, sweetheart. We are going to go and get some. All right, people, on the ready line. Are you me? Yeah! Are you me? Yeah! What are you?
The September issue of EP Magazine focuses on the elderly. Read the current issue and past archived issues for free at www.epmagazine.com.
Monotony. It comes in all shapes and sizes. Dull, tedious, just plain boring. But what is this? A contender, perhaps? Something unboring by the looks of it. Jabs right at dull, an uppercut to tedium, something that keeps you on your toes, keeps your head on a swivel, a knockout punch to your old, boring workouts. Welcome to Fight Camp.
Oscar Mike Radio is a proud podcast partner of Reach Across America Radio, heard every Thursday at 11 a.m. and Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern. They're also big supporters of the nonprofit I Got Your Six, Two Lives at Once. And with every wreath you sponsor through Oscar Mike Radio, $5 goes back to this great organization dedicated to making a difference in the lives of veterans, law enforcement, firefighters, and first responders battling PTSD. Two Lives at Once pairs these brave men and women together with dogs rescued from kill shelters. In this way, two lives are saved at the same time by saving each other. Donate now. Go to reachacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio to help. That's reachacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio.
Marines are made for this. Made for the calling only warriors can answer. Made from an unshakable belief in our nation and a strength that comes from the determination to win together. But you'll have to earn your place among us, because you don't join the Marines. You become one.
Hello and welcome again to Oscar Mike Radio. My name is Travis, Marine Corps veteran and your host. Oscar Mike Radio is co-produced with Sinister One Productions. What's your podcast doing? I want to thank my sponsor, Joyce Asek of Asek Real Estate, and my supporters, Cason Shaving Company, Exceptional Parent Magazine, and Fight Camp. Thank you for joining me on this countdown to number 500. I have a special guest for us today. I've really learned a whole lot already before he's even come on and talk with me about, his career, what he's doing. And I have a first, so we'll get into that here in a minute. But it's without any further delay or ado, I want to welcome my next guest, Mr. Frank Larkin, a Navy veteran, Navy SEAL veteran, and let me sure if I get this right, the 40th Sergeant at Arms of the United States Senate to Oscar Mike Radio. It's a first for me. Frank, welcome to Oscar Mike Radio.
Hey, Travis, thank you. And hello to all your listeners out there. Glad to come on the show today and participate and hopefully have, a conversation that helps to inform folks about some of the issues that we're trying to wrestle with.
Absolutely. And I want to get into those issues, but I want to just talk a little bit more about yourself right now. You grew up and you joined the military, you joined the Navy. What prompted you at that point in your life, you need to say, to make the military a career choice?
I was, like anybody else, grew up. I came from a a large family and graduated high school. I felt I wasn't ready for college, that experience. So we were into Vietnam, the tail end of Vietnam. I had a low draft number, and I just decided that I was going to enlist and try to steer, you know, myself on a path that hopefully would help me grow up and experience some things that would set a foundation for the rest of my life, and that's pretty much what happened.
And you did the Navy, and you also were, one of the first groups, and this is where I get real fuzzy because I'm not sure, did the SEALs start during the time you served? It seemed like it was starting, buzz was getting going. I want to say you're one of the first like SEALs, if I can say it like that.
No, well, first of all, you have to respect the lineage. We're frogmen, and we
Okay.
came from World War II, the original Scouts and Raiders. There was other offshoots, but they eventually were coined as frogmen. They also had a relationship, with the some of the early clandestine service activities that eventually led into the CIA. But the frogmen carried a great tradition, not only in World War II with some spectacular support to critical landings and operations along the coastline, but also into the Korea conflict and then on into Vietnam. And from there, the SEALs were, inaugurated by Kennedy, who wanted a robust capability, maritime commando capability, and then that has matured on into the current state of the naval special warfare community today, which is not only SEALs but special warfare combat crewmen and other just great patriots that are dedicated to protect this nation.
What was your time in the SEALs like at that time? Because it's a different SEAL type of warfighter than back when you served.
It was, coming off of Vietnam, just, a lot of, warriors that were coming home with some tremendous experience, certainly in the jungle warfare, riverine warfare environments. It was, at that time, licking the wounds, so to speak. So I witnessed a lot of those warriors that had made multiple deployments, had gained some incredible experiences, come back and try to share that with, the newer generations of frogmen and SEALs at that point that, we were trying to build into the pipeline, not knowing when the next conflict was going to come. And again, there's little fires that break out all over, the globe that, special operations are dispatched to try to, get in early, try to make a difference so it doesn't blow up into a larger, conflict that requires, many more men and women to deploy, and certainly an investment larger than what we've seen with some of our small unit tactics.
You do this, you serve in the SEALs, and then you transition out. What was getting out of the military like? I mean, after being in a job field like that where you're high mission tempo, high speed, very dangerous, what was transition like?
Well, it's interesting because this aspect of transition is very important. It's not trivial. For me, it was a planned exit. I wanted to go out, go to school. I wanted to experience a few other things. I loved being with the teams, but I also wanted to build my base even more. I had matured and certainly had some experiences in my during my military time. So I left with the intention of getting my degree in the Philadelphia area. And I also, once I was about a year out from my undergraduate degree, I joined the police department and wound up with another very informative experience. I walked the beat in an urban area, a tough neighborhood. as a white cop that, a predominantly black neighborhood, that I certainly was the outsider, and they hadn't had somebody like me for a couple decades, walking the beat in that neighborhood, and quickly realized, despite the fact that here I was, a frogman, I had all this military training and experience. Now I was being dropped into uh, an environment that I certainly was not prepared for. And I had to figure out real quick how to survive in that environment. And it was one of the greatest growth experiences that I had.
Really?
It was I got to know the people there. Uh, I instead of, I really focused on what I could do to help folks in that neighborhood, and how I could, build relationships and ultimately trust. And in my year that I walked that beat, developed some great friends, and eventually that neighborhood came to my rescue one day, and that was the real true sign that I had been accepted. But
Wow.
it was also something that I carried with me with the rest of my professional career, the lessons that I learned there.
So you serve in one AO, in another AO, and it's a lot of the same lessons, but it seems like you're right. It's the power of the relationship and being able to work with people. Was that something that you really enjoyed doing? Was meeting the humans where they are, or was it something you really had
Yeah,
to work out to develop?
without a doubt. And three key, what I would say, legs, or factors that I share with a lot of new, uh, not only warriors, military warriors in uniform, but also law enforcement and other first responders, is, first of all, treat people like you would like you want to be treated. It's something that it's been passed down through the millennium of our parents, grandparents, and so forth. That great counsel: treat people like you want to be treated. But you also have to ask that question in reverse: how do you think they want to be treated? Which may be different
Huh.
than how you were raised.
Yeah.
And again, I got dropped into a neighborhood that I was definitely the outsider. I needed to ask that question a lot. And once I started to figure it out, things went a lot smoother. The other thing is, always treat people with respect, no matter where they come from. Everyone has a different background, has walked a different path, but again, they're human beings, and for the most part, they're trying to do good things. And then the third thing is dignity. Never take anyone's dignity away. If you injure somebody's dignity, you're almost always going to have a fight. So, those three, legs of the stool, so to speak, I stood on for many years, still do, and try to pass that, hopefully sage wisdom on to some of the younger folks that are getting into the business now.
So I'm reading about you, Frank. I'm talking with you now, and I'm pinching myself, in this aspect
Hey,
because
first of all, I'm just a regular guy.
well,
I'm just,
still,
it's just, thank you.
how do you go from all that? Because this is the military experience that people don't understand a lot of times is you've had to hop or transition to different things throughout your professional career. And some people get out of school, go into finance, go into medical field, and that's where they stay their entire career. You've done these different things. So how do you go from, Navy SEAL to law enforcement to being nominated to be, hang on, let me see if I get this right, the Sergeant at Arms of the United States Senate. And we got to see some of that in action, last year. But how's that happen?
Well,
Because just before because not only do you have to be a certain caliber of person, more than one person to see something in you that said, what, he can do that function at a very high level. And that's what interests me.
well, I always stay true to, accepting responsibility, being accountable. We talked about transition. When you move from one thing to another, you always want to go you want to make that movement on a high note, on top of the wave. You don't want to be, crushed or pushed out, or leaving on bad terms. And that's every time I made a transition, it was always with that thought in mind. One, I'm going to go into this job. I'm going to try to make it better, any way I can. I always gravitated towards those tough assignments, the ones that nobody else wanted. I figured, if I go into something that's really, banged up and broken, there's only one way, to go, and that's up. So, if you've got something that, you're walking into, it's already, wrapped up, it's got a big bow. Well, there's not a whole lot of opportunity there to make change. But if you get it something that's, that needs help, that needs repair, needs leadership and so forth. That's really what drove me, at least my appetite for different types of assignments, and so I went into it head on with I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to cultivate my teammates to be the best they could possibly be, and see if we can achieve some levels of excellence and be proud of what we've done. And so, these transitions, again, really important to understand, especially in our veteran community. You have to plan for it. Hopefully, taking the high road as you move on to something new, not to be, fearful of that move, though, it's intimidating, no doubt. You're leaving something that you're going to something that you really don't know. But I would say that if you were successful in your military career, those attributes, those same, foundations are going to allow you to be successful, outside the military.
Throughout all this, life goes on and you become a father to Ryan. First, before we talk about Ryan, what was fatherhood like to you, Frank?
Well, I had a little bit of I came from a large family, but I had a strict father. He was the only child, so his reference was always a little different than what my brothers and sisters had experienced being in a large family. Kind of a taskmaster. He had high standards. Was not a real affectionate guy, but made it very clear what his expectations were, and there were sanctions. If I was bad, or if any of my brothers and sisters were bad, there definitely were penalty points assigned. So
I understand.
Yeah, I think everybody, kind of, back in the day where, it was, yeah, you didn't want your mom telling your dad that
No.
she had problems with you, or you got sent home from school with a note, or, they got a call from, somebody that, you were, acting, you know, inappropriately. I mean, to put it politely. I mean, that sets up a bad confrontation, you know, with your father that, you know, as I said, there's consequences to behavior and there's accountability.
You do that though, and you have this, this human being in your arms. It changes you, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. It does. I would say the biggest change that I had being a father was, I didn't get a lot of hugs, or, and I don't even recall at any one time in my relationship with my father and sometimes with my mother that they said, "Hey, yeah, we love you." They just were not all
Yeah.
that openly affectionate, and that's something that I changed with my own kids. I hugged the hell out of them. I told them all the time that I loved them, that I was proud of them, and I tried to be realistic with my expectations. I really wanted them to make decisions, learn how to make decisions. I tried to give them as many different experiences that would help you know uh, provide a level of independence and confidence that they could move through, different tasks and experiences. Especially with my daughter, I said, don't hang your hook on some guy. I said, you need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. You need to be able to navigate your way through life alone if you have to. You never know what kind of cards you're going to be dealt, what kind of pitch that you're going to, have to field. And both my kids, exceeded my expectations.
When did you start to see that Ryan wanted to join the Navy or follow in your footsteps and become a Navy SEAL?
Well, I would say that I never saw him trying to follow my footsteps. I was always pretty clear to him that, hey, look, you got to cut your own path. What I did, don't think that there's an expectation that you've got to, follow those same steps, with the exception that I want you to be a good person. I'm trying to be a good person. I want you to be a good person. I want you to, live to that ethic. So how did he wind up where he was? I was assigned to the New York field office of the Secret Service as a supervisor on 9/11, and was caught up, on that terrible day that we were attacked, and should have been dead probably about 5 times that day. I got caught in the building collapses, other things that had gone on that had just, the difference between life and death was whether you stepped right or left at times. And he had witnessed that day unfold from a hillside about 20 miles west of the city where we lived. We had 18 families around us whose parents didn't come home, that night. Parents of kids that he went to school with. He saw, the buildings come down. I had initially been reported as missing. I was not able to get off the site until late at night, when I eventually got decontaminated. My clothes were completely, just messed with, debris and fluids and so forth. And I wound up, finally coming home and walking through the door. I was in a set of sweatpants and sweatshirt that was like 4 times my size. So, half of it was dragging on the floor. My eyes were beet red. I was cut up. And I walked through the door, and the look on the face of my family, I mean, just the emotion, the shock was just, it was impalpable. You couldn't palpate that level of emotion. It was shocking, and especially with my son. And we hugged each other, we cried, and so I wound up, working as a supervisor at Ground Zero from 9/11 on through December 6th, represent the Secret Service at the site, in both through rescue and recovery operations. About 2 weeks after 9/11, my wife came to me and said, something's wrong with Ryan. He's not talking. He's not leaving his room. He's completely, closed in and isolated himself. So I wound up, sitting down with him and trying to find out, hey, what's going on, buddy? And he says, Dad, I want you to take me down to Ground Zero. I'm having, real issues trying to understand what happened. I've lost a lot of my friends have lost their parents, and I can't stop thinking about this. I need to understand what's going on. So I said, well, I don't think that's really a good idea. You can imagine 2 weeks after that event, Ground Zero was just a horrible, place to be. The recovery operations were going on. Active fires were still going on, heavy in smoke. They'd finally figured out that it wasn't safe to breathe the air. So everybody was now wearing respirators and other protective gear. So I said, look, I don't think your mom's going to go for it, but if she does, the deal is, if I take you down there, if I see any signs you can't handle it, we're out of there, no questions asked. And I convinced his mother that something inside me said, he needed to do this, despite all common logic. I needed to do this, and so we went down to Ground Zero. I dressed him up in a ray jacket, helmet, respirator, so you really couldn't tell that he was a 14-year-old, a boy. We walked around the site for about 3.5 hours. The debris field was just immense. And at the end, I said, "You seen enough?" And he says, "Yeah, I appreciate you bringing me down here." Well, that led to about 3 years later, 4 years later, he came home one day from school after he had graduated from high school. He was working as a salvage diver, cleaning the bottom of boats and so forth in the Chesapeake Bay, Annapolis area. And he said, "I just enlisted in the Navy. And oh, by the way, I volunteered for the SEAL program." Well, I got to tell you, both his mother and I were just knocked over. We didn't see it coming. Didn't talk about it. He said, "Yeah," he said, "This is what I got to do." And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well," I said, "what happened on 9/11 can't ever happen again. And I'm going to be part of the solution." And so he, like many other men and women, dropped everything after 9/11, and they stood on the line and raised their hand and went forward to make sure that it didn't happen again. And I think they've been pretty successful, though there's been some huge prices paid.
For sure. Before we move into one of those, I am curious. Some of my children, I'm a father, talked about joining the Marine Corps, and none of them have served. But would you share with me, what was it like seeing your son in his, Navy, with the Navy Trident for the first time?
I'll tell you what, the pride I had was just immeasurable. I had the opportunity to be able to see him a number of times while he went through training. It's hard to go through training as a legacy, and then besides that, I had a pretty senior position, in the Department of Defense at the time. And, I didn't want that or other aspects of my background to interfere with his training, to put any additional pressure. But still, they knew, who I was. They knew that he was my son. And, again, I think that anybody like that winds up carrying a little bit more pressure than others. I don't want to say that, there was any special treatment that he got one way or the other. It's just that, there's just a higher level of expectation.
Yeah.
But when he graduated, I'll tell you what, I was, immensely proud of him. He had a high ethic of performance. He was really into being a SEAL. And once he got his trident, he went on to become a special operations combat medic, and immediately deployed into Iraq right after that, about the 2008, 2009 timeframe.
And this is where it changed. And, I don't want to delve too deep into that, but, you found out he served, he came back home and committed suicide. I've talked to people whose family members commit suicide. There's several different things about that. But you took a very different approach to this, where, as I understand it, you're like, wait a minute, there's something deeper going on here with what happened to my son, Ryan. And maybe it's not PTSD, maybe it's something else. What started formulating in your mind to sit there and say, you know what, I think this is a different root cause for my son's situation, Frank?
He had a total of 4 heavy combat tours, 2 to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan. The second tour to Iraq and the first tour in Afghanistan basically were back to back. They had lost a SEAL medic in Afghanistan. They had asked for volunteers to, they needed another senior medic to augment and he rogered up from Iraq. So he came home for 2 weeks, reset, and then immediately redeployed to Afghanistan. His deployment period was almost a year long. So, which was a factor. And when he came off that deployment, that's the first indication that we started to see, or at least hear about, that he started having issues with sleep, that he was having nightmares. He became, he was a very quiet guy, and he was one of those folks that, when he said something, people listened. He was a little bit of a prankster. He liked to have a good time. He had a great, aptitude for playing musical instruments, loved to play the guitar. And they also had an advanced, from his testing and so forth at school, ability to abstract. So he could think second, third order effects. So he had to build a reputation as being a great planner. So, but he came home after that year-long deployment, and we started seeing some of those changes, and at least he started expressing some difficulty. He had a relationship with a woman that had been very, I think they were planning on getting married. They had lived together for 5 years, and that the relationship suddenly crumbled. He went off to train as a SEAL sniper, and then wound up deploying the fourth time back to Afghanistan into the Helmand Valley, initially to an outpost that was like Fort Apache, very kinetic. It was the center of all the opium growth and harvesting, and eventually wound up back at Leatherneck, where they would constantly deploy out on different missions. Came off that fourth deployment back to the States, and he was with SEAL Team 7 for all 4 deployments. Departed SEAL Team 7 to become the lead petty officer within the training detachment responsible for special operations urban combat training, where they would do the explosive entries into rooms, buildings, and so forth, use breaching charges, concussion grenades. Very realistic. He's preparing all the platoons that were deploying to these different points of conflict, and so it was a very high fidelity level of training that was going on. What we started to realize as he was going through that period as the LPO in SALC is that we started to see more and more signs that something was changing in him. He was becoming hypervigilant. He was quick to anger. Again, the sleeping problems became more, problems with anxiety, depression. This was not Ryan. Ryan was a very highly accomplished, high-level operator, decorated, revered by his fellow teammates. And now he's just coming part of the seams. We don't know why. He comes forward to ask for help because at that time everybody's saying, "Hey, if you have a problem, come on forward. We'll help you out." And he did that. And when the low-hanging fruit didn't bear any results, and things appeared to be more complicated than an easy fix, then essentially his command basically said, "Hey, we don't have time for this," and kicked him to the curb. He wanted to make the teams a career. He loved being a SEAL, and he basically was forced out. He honorably discharged with his trident, and his medical care went from military medicine to the VA, and that is a different set of experiences, kind of a shit show of trying to get him help, and again another form of painful transition that created more wounds for him, like many of the men and women that were coming out of theater. They volunteered to go serve their nation, but they went and experienced different things, in their effort to protect this nation, and things that, bore consequences, not only physical, but mental, spiritual. We started to understand this term, invisible wounds. They came home, they looked normal, but inside they were chewed up pretty bad. And they weren't getting a lot of answers as to what was happening. And so a lot of labels were hung on them. Generally they were pushed into the mental health category, and the predominant, method of treatment for a lot of folks was, prescription drugs, to try to deal with the symptoms, not the root cause of what may have been going on. And so Ryan experienced, all this for over a period, 2 years, a year in the military, a year outside the military, a lot of drug prescriptions, no clinical diagnosis as to what was going on. And basically you just looked at him and he was just unraveling, a kid that was at the top of the mountain, the top of his game, just an elite warrior, now is just, just can't even, make his way through the day.
When did it become, in your mind, apparent to you that this was maybe physiological, like something, it was more than just what you were seeing in front of you, that there was a root cause that said, what, maybe there's something physically wrong with this whole situation? Because this is where you have really leaned in and tried to educate people on why this happened.
So all along, the diagnosis that they were trying to hang, or at least the assessments, were PTSD, that he had a substance use issue associated with alcohol, because they were, initially you get into the teams or a lot of military units, the alcohol is a social, kind of platform. And then it turns into, as you get into these invisible wounds, it turns into over-the-counter, self-medication to get to sleep, deal with the nightmares, deal with the pain, because they're all in pain. And so he had that. And then prescription drug abuse, because, they must have pushed 40 different medications his way. Everything from potions, lotions, to creams, to high-end psychotropic, mood-stabilizing drugs. As I said, they never settled on any one diagnosis. So he didn't even feel like he was in his own body. But the one thing that he said consistently was, nobody's listening to me. Something's wrong with my head, but nobody's listening. They keep telling me I'm crazy. And so, that created a whole series of wounds that he was wrestling with, that, he felt, shame. He felt abandonment of his brothers. He was very loyal to them. He was their doc. He was their medic. He was abruptly separated from the teams, and he carried that burden and struggled with what's happening. Why am I in this slide? Why can't I stop? I'm not getting any answers. And I know what the next questions come, so I'll just go right to it. We're sitting around a fire one night, and he says, "Dad, I'm broken up inside." And to look at him, he looked like a gladiator, but he says, "I'm broken up inside, and I'm probably not going to live too long." And as a father, I'm saying to him, "Hey, Ryan, I've got you. We're buddies. We'll get through this. We'll figure this out." He says, "Look, I want you to promise me that if anything happens to me, that you'll donate my brain for traumatic brain injury research, for breacher syndrome research." And I said, "I promise you I'll do that. But again, that, we're going to get through this. You're going to live a long life." And a month later, he took his life. We were away, and came home and found that he had taken his life in the basement of our home, dressed in the SEAL Team 7 t-shirt, red, white, and blue board shorts, and it illuminated his shadow box, all his medals, ribbons, and so forth. And it just, ripped our hearts in half. I mean, I've been through a lot in my life. I've had 35, 40 years of rescuing other people, and in the end, I couldn't rescue my own son. It was devastating. And so we satisfied his wish, and we got his brain donated to a research effort at Bethesda Walter Reed that was looking into the effects of blast exposure on the brain. And about 2 months later, they called us in and they said, we've got some findings that we want to share with you. And I said, well, don't tell me what you think I want to hear. I want to know the straight facts, and don't sugarcoat it. And they said, well, he says, Ryan died from undiagnosed traumatic brain injury at the microscopic level, uniquely, and they emphasize uniquely related to blast exposure. I said, what? He says, yes, the exposure to blast that he's incurred, and not only in his deployments, but training, have created microscopic level injury in his brain, in all the sectors of his brain. And we're only seeing it in blast related scenarios. And by that time they had maybe a dozen brains, a lot from special warriors that had documented weapons handling and exposure to blasts, and these patterns were consistent. So with that information, I said, I got some answers that a lot of people don't get. It lifted a burden off our shoulders, but now, I had to do something with this. And I realized that my son all along knew that something was wrong inside his head. That's what he kept saying. Something's wrong with my head. Nobody's listening. Well, I got into his computer through the aid of some friends and some special places, and we found out that he all along, over this 2-year period, had been downloading studies and research papers on traumatic brain injury and blast exposure, and also had been looking into the drugs that they've been prescribing him. To me, that right then and there told me I didn't like what he did. I didn't support what he did when he took his life. But at that moment, I understood why he did it. He was trying to prove that, in fact, something was wrong with his head. He was all about his teammates and his buddies who were suffering like he was, and he was going to do something about it. Now he was passing that baton on to me. And that's the path I'm on right now, is to inform people that, hey, something else is going on here. We've got an insidious threat to our brain health, and it has ramifications that are far reaching.
We talked about this before we started, recording the conversation, where looking at your situation and learning about you and Ryan, I thought about it, we didn't really have this type of injury until it was starting to come in World War I, so the Civil War, but World War I's where shellshock got really coined, and the British had Dr. Sigmund Freud study it, and it was a problem back then. But you're saying the repeated, bang, 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 the grenades, the charges, all that had cumulative damage to people's brains, your son being one of them.
Yes, that's correct. Well, we were finding out, and you're exactly, spot on. World War I was really the first introduction in mass of this explosive effect. I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago, they did a movie. They stitched together a bunch of World War I video clips, and then they read the lips of a lot of the soldiers that were, involved in the trench warfare, back in France and so forth. And I apologize for not recalling the name of the movie, but you could see that the look that was on their faces after these overhead explosions would go off. They'd look, you couldn't see any visible injuries, but there was something that obviously had changed in them. Yep. And so since World War I into World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and on, we've been calling these conditions coming off the battlefield like soldier's heart, battlefield psychosis, battlefield fatigue, there's multiple names that they have come up with, predominantly all in the mental health side of things. because there was no visible injuries. And this is where this term invisible wounds comes from. And today we call it, post-traumatic stress disorder. And so finally we're getting some answers that, wait a minute, there actually may be a biological injury here. We're starting to see.
Physiological, not psychological.
Right. Yeah. And because of, and again, right now, our big handicap is we can't see this injury in a living person. Only in postmortem analysis can we see that under intense microscopic examination. That's how they qualify it. Right now, the Defense Department brain repository has almost 500 military brains in it. Most of it from a large part of it from the global war on terror. Veterans and active duty that have donated their brain for this research. It's amazing what they are finding. And when you look at somebody's training and operational profile, the use of the weapons, which is a lot more intimate than when I was in, the use of it, controlled explosives, with the breaching charges, the concussion grenades, the mortars, the rockets, the exposure to the IEDs. It's repetitive, low level blast exposure that, each blast is tearing the circuitry of the brain, and it's a compounding effect. And if you don't allow that brain to rest and heal, then it just keeps getting worse and worse, and the scar tissue just builds and builds and builds on top of each other to the point where the brain is not communicating in the way it should. The neurochemicals become imbalanced, the hormones. We've all heard about operators coming home with high cortisol levels and low testosterone. So there's second, third order effects, let alone the fact that now many of these men and women are just they're forgetting things. They can't organize their way through the day. They can't regulate their emotions. Their executive functions are chewed up, and again, very often manifested in behavior. And that's why, without the diagnostics, it almost always defaults to a mental health diagnosis.
You cannot assess this when someone's alive. You can only wait until they pass. I just want to ask, because I got to learn about HBOT, hyperbaric oxygen therapy. When they do brain scans, if they think you're having problems, I don't want to assume, but have you looked at that at all?
Yeah, and a lot of folks that have been through that have had some very positive results. They use spec scans to kind of do initial baseline, and then they compare it. And again, one thing I've learned about the medical community and research is it's very competitive. Competitive for research funds, competitive for tenure at universities. It's competitive for who gets to publish. It's competitive who gets the credit. And many times, if you're dealing with the Department of Defense or the VA or HHS, it's how do you control the data so that we don't look bad?
What started happening to you as you start going down this road and saying, hey, this happened to my son. Did this happen to anybody else? Did you start finding common cases of the same thing that happened to Ryan?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the thing that really motivated me and accelerated this. I went out to the Naval Special Warfare Command, and to give credit to them and Special Operations Command, U.S. Special Operations Command, when we laid this evidence from Ryan's analysis and we brought some other case studies with us, it opened up their eyes. And I got to give credit to the leadership that was there, at least the leadership that were jolted by this information, that said, hey, we've got to look into this. There is something going on here. The stories that we were initially told about what happened to Ryan and some others didn't line up with this hard evidence that it was now being presented to them. And so they said they saw this as an existential threat to potentially to their operations. When you look, and whether you agree, but in my view, this is a national security threat, potentially a national security threat. And you ask me, well, what do you mean? How could this be a national security threat? Well,
Okay.
what distinguishes us from many other militaries from around the world is right to the tip of the spear. Our warriors are given the license to adapt, to flex, to pivot, to innovate, to get the job done. And very often you have some senior telling you, here's your mission, figure it out and get it done.
Yep.
And so, time and time again through our military history, we've heard where, battles, campaigns, wars were directly influenced by those warriors on the ground at the tip of the spear. So in order for us to have that edge, we need that thinking warrior brain. And if there's something insidious like blast exposure that potentially can challenge that thinking warrior brain, that's when it becomes potentially an issue for recruitment. It becomes an issue for retention. It becomes issue for operational effectiveness.
Yeah.
And so I'm on this like a dog on a bone. I want this researched. I want science to tell us what's going on. I want us to open up the aperture and try to reduce the prejudice that we've had in many cases, HBOT being one of those, areas of prejudice. Psychedelics, again, another area. I'm not saying to be reckless in these areas, but let's put the science against it and find out what's working, and then develop a course of operations or a pathway that treats our warriors, our veterans, with precision care. Not one size fits all, but one size fits one. And in order to do that, you have to listen to those people. And that's the one thing Ryan constantly said. They're not listening to me. They're quick to judge me. They're quick with their assessments that basically covered, their actions. We got to figure this out.
So you're at a stage where you are raising the flag saying we have a problem. You've gotten support from, these naval entities that you've went to. What does the medical community think about your findings, and are they helping you out at all?
Well, it's interesting. You have defense health entities. You have the VA. So defense health has been slow, with the exception of Special Operations Command, to get into this. They spent over $3 billion on mental health programs, suicide prevention, and there's a direct relationship between traumatic brain injury and suicidal ideation and suicidal acts. That has been scientifically validated. And on the VA side, they talk about 22 veterans who we lose a day. It shifts from year to year depending on how they manipulate the statistics. As a former homicide detective, I will tell you that there's a big gray zone in the middle where you don't have the evidence to call it a homicide or a suicide or unattended death due to disease or whatever. In the shadow of opioid crisis and alcoholism and so forth, we're losing a lot of veterans in that gray space that are not classified as suicide, but highly suspect that they took their own lives, via those means. There's also, and this is just what happens in many cases, where you find a death and you have a family left behind. It's not ruled a suicide because there's concern about insurance and, the downside of that suicide declaration. So we need the science, and we really have some research that's going on right now at some centers of excellence outside the military that are really starting to peel the onion on this, and we're starting to see some light that we're going to be able to diagnose this in a living person within the next couple of years. The elevated exposure that this is now getting is getting the attention of the Defense Department. It's getting the attention of the VA, and we need them. I'm not here to poke a big stick in their chest, but I do want to get their attention. They need to be part of this solution, and they need to make this a priority, and not continue to admire this. This is a national security issue. This is an issue that will haunt us if we don't get in front of it. We have an opportunity to buy this down on the front end by adjusting some of our training methods, by increasing monitoring of those MOSs that are more high risk than others, by putting an increased level of attention to those people that had been through some type of explosive incident. Our weapon systems now are much more powerful than they were decades ago, and our use of explosives and this does not also eliminate the exposure to direct impact injuries, that people playing football or have been in combatives or have been in a car accident or experienced falls. This all compounds.
What can people do to assist you, help out? And the reason I'm asking is, I asked me from the VA, how is a 22 a day thing going? What is that? Because it's been part of our lexicon for the last 11 years. And she explained to me that, to be candid, the numbers haven't changed that much. And I'm like, well, how can that be? So much effort and time and money has been put into it. But this would be very significant if we find out, in fact, what? It's physiological.
That's right. You got it.
It's physiological. Well, then the whole narrative changes, Frank.
You got it.
You're not just throwing Xanax, lithium, Prozac at these, service members anymore. You're actually treating the body instead of a psychological. I can't even begin to imagine what's going to happen if this gets legs. So how can people help you?
So as you're pointing out, this is very disruptive. But I don't want to be irresponsible to say that there is not mental health components. Sure. This needs to go hand in glove and looked at holistically, not one or the other. So for your listeners that maybe think that I'm completely throwing down on mental health and the psychiatric side of this equation, I am not. It's just that the science is supposed to challenge our facts and assumptions. We can't be afraid of it. This is disruptive. So let's open our aperture, get into this, and find out what's going on. Same with drugs. My biggest complaint about the dispensing of drugs, and again, if there's some physicians listening to me or other, medical professionals, they might think I'm very arrogant in this statement, but it's unbelievable. For those that are able to prescribe drugs, there's a condition or an aspect of this called off-label prescription. You don't even have to be a certified professional in psychiatry or in some other discipline, but you can still write drugs that fall within that discipline's bucket. So you see a lot of general practitioners, you see a lot of other practitioners that are writing these mood stabilizing drug prescriptions for depression, anxiety, you name it. They have no background, no specialized background in these disciplines, but yet are dispensing these drugs as if, almost, what we've seen with the issues associated with the opioids.
Yeah.
So again, I know some people may think that, my statements or my, what I'm saying is an arrogant and uninformed, but I tell you what, the data supports me. And when you talk to veterans and they tell you they're on 15, 20 different medications.
No, I'm not hearing you say, psychological care is bad or wrong. What I'm hearing you say, listening to you, is that, hey, there's a whole physiological side of the coin that needs to be looked at. so the two can
Correct.
work together. That's
right.
what I'm listening to. And so for someone who says, you know what, I'm in the medical field, I want to help out, or how do I raise awareness about that? How would we do that for you?
Well, one, start to, become informed.
Okay.
Start, institute some queries about this, low-level blast exposure, about this new area of traumatic brain injury. And by the way, one of the reasons a lot of this is classified as mental health, there are no insurance reimbursement codes for what we're talking about. And we also don't know the long-term effects of this blast exposure. We do see the scarring and some of the other damage post-mortem fairly quickly after a series of exposures, but we don't know, much like what they're dealing with our professional sports players and the CTE issue, which is a whole different pattern of brain injury.
Yes.
A lot of people get it confused, but we don't know what happens 10, 20, 30 years down the road yet with these folks. So again, the debris field that we're talking about as a result of these invisible wounds could go decades behind us. And we need to understand this. But again, we have to stop, feeding people in the front end of the pipe. And that's where the prevention side of this, adjusting our training protocols, demanding that our weapons manufacturers and our ammunition manufacturers be part of the solution, tied to procurement and acquisition to buy down the blast effects to the warrior, to increase, to develop. The holy grail here is to get the diagnostics that we can see this in a living person. Sure. And then develop those precision treatments to help somebody that has been hurt. Hopefully get to them early in this process, as opposed to what happened to Ryan, where he just got so far down the road, so damaged that he got to a place of darkness and isolation that, as I said, his last act was to prove that something, in fact, was wrong with his head.
Is there a foundation or a nonprofit that you had or associated with that's helping you drive this forward, Frank?
So I'm with Troops First Foundation, and we have an effort called Warrior Call. It's pretty simple. It's about connecting to those folks that have become isolated, disenfranchised from the system, so to speak. They've lost trust and they get themselves in dark places. So it's simply that we encourage, anyone in uniform, out of uniform, first responder, hey, make a call to somebody you have, one of your old teammates, somebody that that served in uniform. Take a call from them, because sometimes they reach out, and I got it. Sometimes it's not always convenient, but you never know the power of that call. And then have an honest conversation. If you sense that, hey, they're not in a good place, then wrap your arms around them and let's get them, lashed up with some resources. There's some great folks at the VA. Yes, it's a big bureaucracy. It's a pain in the ass, to deal with at times. And for somebody that's hurt and barely can make their way through the day, it's a difficult process to get through. But this is where their buddies can come and help, and other veteran service organizations can be of great aid to help get these men and women lashed up to resources. And like you pointed out, there's hyperbaric oxygen options out there. You're hearing more and more about the psychedelics. You're hearing more about equine therapy, other programs. But a lot of what the common thread is that they pull folks out of the darkness and they get them attached back to the tribe. Tribal separation is a bad thing. Yes. When you separate from your unit, the thing that their friends, whether you've been in combat or not, you've had common experiences. But when you transition out and you move away from them, it's difficult. And whether you're an E3 or an E4 or all the way up to a general or an admiral, transition is hard, and you've got to be ready for it. And everybody, you're not alone. And that's the other thing I would share.
You're not alone.
About the warrior call effort is, trying to at least instill a sense of hope in these folks, that they're not alone. There are other people out there that are experiencing this, and that there are a lot of people working on this. And hopefully we can make a difference here in the next couple of years. So you ask, how can they help? Start beating the freaking drum, to your congressmen, your senators, anybody that your teammates, talk about this, how, get, read up on it, become smarter, and help become an advocate for promoting this research and developing the knowledge that I think that ultimately is going to help out a lot of people.
Well, Frank, I'll have the link to the Troops First Foundation in the Oscar Mike Radio show post. I appreciate you coming on and sharing so openly and candidly about Ryan's story, and dare I say Ryan's legacy, because, I think, I don't want to assume, but I have to think you're thinking, what, if I can get some other SEAL, some other military service member help before they do what Ryan did, then, this loss was not in vain.
That's right. And we've lost too many to suicide.
Yeah.
When you see one, that's too many. And that kind of grates on me. This, the numbers that they throw out, we're only losing 19 now, better than 22. Well, that's, we're losing a lot more, a lot more. But the bottom line is, if we lose one, that's too many. And again, as we talked about, what's available to veterans out there, as I said, give the VA a chance. We're trying to help them now modernize their record system, so there's not a gap between the military, health system and the VA, records management. They've had trouble trying to get their case management together for many years, but I think we're finally making some progress, so that veterans don't have to keep going in and repeating their story over and over and over again. That in fact, we've got a good capture of not only their operational record, but their medical record. And but yeah, look, I think we're starting to move in the right direction, but we need your help. So start beating that drum out there, demanding action and accountability. That's the other thing. Demand accountability. What are you doing about this?
Rick, I want to thank you for coming on and just, opening up a whole new side of things and sharing so openly. Again, folks, I want to have this information in the Oscar Mike Radio show post. There's no reason why we can't, help you out with what you're trying to do here. And I certainly hope that we can see an outcome that you're looking for with all the work you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for the time. And Ryan's been here with me. A lot of what, I've said is him speaking through me. And at some point, I'm going to see him again. And I don't want to disappoint him. So failure's not an option. I appreciate the opportunity to come on. And hopefully this has helped your listeners. And whatever I can do, help you, let me know.
Absolutely, folks. Again, we are Oscar Mike. We are on the mission, on the move. As I say, Oscar Mike Radio, mission in flight. We'll see you next time. And let's go ahead and take some action now. Thank you.
The biggest fear Gold Star families have, that their child will be forgotten.
We need to never forget freedom wasn't free.
It's the fact that they give us the life we have now. We should remember them and give thanks to them.
If I can be a part of something today that's going to make the surviving family of any of these veterans, these heroes, feel better tomorrow, then it's worth it.
That one wreath symbolizes one family that was able to smile because of the generous donations.
To sponsor a wreath and honor a veteran, visit wreathsacrossamerica.org.
Thank you for listening and watching Oscar Mike Radio, where our active duty service members and veterans are in action and the mission is in flight. Oscar Mike Radio is an oversized load co-Sinister One production. If you are a veteran or know a veteran who needs help, please dial 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line.